Hello and welcome to our Self-Compassion for Parents webinar. Thank you for your willingness to spend the next hour or so on this self-compassionate adventure. Whether you are a parent or a caregiver of any kind, or just someone who gives a lot to others and takes very little for yourself, we hope you can benefit from this session and maybe begin to include yourself in the circle of kindness and compassion. So taking the time and watching this webinar is in itself an act of self-compassion. So perhaps you can give yourself some appreciation for that in this moment. So May is the Mental Health Awareness Month, and this webinar is a part of the Wellbeing and Resilience series that our team at Chatham County Safety Net Planning Council is producing with Gateway Community Service Board. And both organizations are located in Savannah, Georgia. But regardless where you are, we believe that you will be able to relate to this conversation and benefit from it. Also, just to acknowledge how this spring of 2020 has been particularly challenging for families and individuals, as we all have been trying to deal with the global coronavirus pandemic, and also its impact on our lives and on our emotional, mental, and physical health. So we truly recognize the importance of reaching youth and parents with the message of compassion and resilience during this time. So my name is Vera Salzburn, and I am the program director for the Prevent Suicide Today program at Chatham County Safety Net Planning Council. I am a mindful self-compassion trained teacher and an applied suicide intervention skills training master trainer. As a teacher in self-compassion, what I've learned is that it truly takes compassion to heal the world, compassion for others, and compassion for yourself. And as someone who works in suicide prevention, I've also learned that it takes a village to save a child from suicide, and each of us is that child, and all of us are that village. So while I do take care of a lot of people and my dog in my life, and I am a daughter to my parents, I am actually not a parent to a human child. So that's why I invited someone experienced in parenthood and also very dear to my heart to join me today for this conversation, self-compassion for parents. So my friend Anne Dillard is here. Hi, Anne.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Thank you. So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And yeah, just full disclosure that Anne and I have known each other for several years now, and I would even go as far as saying that we've been each other's anchors. Wouldn't you say, Anne?
Yes, I would say that. Absolutely.
So yeah, we have a rare and special friendship that I'm just so thankful for. And I just thought, you know, what a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about our identities, but specifically identity as a parent and identity as a friend.
Yeah.
So in fact, I just to describe my relationship to Anne and how I feel about her, how I feel about you, and just the life that you live, is that you're such a courageous person, and as a mother, you taught me how it takes courage to raise children, courage to show up for them, and courage to show up for yourself. And as my friend, what I've really learned from our friendship, that it takes true friendship to remind us of what we need, friendship in which we can be both the needy and the needed, right?
Yes, well said.
So just a little bit about Anne. Anne is a dedicated mom, a techie, entrepreneur, and a musician. She balances the pull between her technology and creative aspirations on a daily basis, working in the software field. Yes, she's super smart, specifically with mobile apps. A lover of nature and all things outdoors, you'll often find her walking in the park and practicing her new macro photography hobby. And also, Anne is a big proponent of healthy living, to include a dedicated fitness routine and attempting to eat well, even during a pandemic, especially during the pandemic.
It's very difficult, yes.
And she lives in Midtown Atlanta with her son and sweet cat Stella. So again, thank you, Anne, for being a part of this conversation and bringing the experience of motherhood and parenthood into this discussion, into this webinar. Do you want to add anything about yourself besides what I read right now?
I think that's probably a pretty good bio, and pretty good sort of simple statement about my life. Yeah, I'm just excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to you about this topic. It's just thinking about this webinar has made me think about my parenting and my experiences. So I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk through it and think about it and ask those questions of myself. So
nice. Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
All right. So in this session, Anne and I will attempt to touch on a few things. So our intention today is to really discuss, what is self-compassion and the meaning of self-compassion and the purpose of self-compassion in parenthood. And we'll talk about the components of self-compassion, which are self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And we'll spend maybe a little bit more time talking about mindfulness, as both Anne and I are mindfulness practitioners and find it a very helpful tool. Also, we'll talk about the two sides of self-compassion, the strong and the tender side. We will practice a couple of mindfulness and self-compassion exercises, like the parenting pause and also self-compassion break. And finally, we'll talk about how self-compassion is a gift. Yes, it's a gift to yourself and also to your children, and how this gift of compassion just keeps on giving, right? So let's dive in.
Sure.
And let's dive in by exploring how we give or don't give compassion to others and ourselves. So Anne, you're going to be a part of this experiment.
Okay.
So maybe you can think of a situation in which perhaps you had a friend, also a parent, who maybe was struggling in some way. Maybe he or she felt inadequate or experienced some sort of failure and felt like a failure as a parent.
Yeah.
Or maybe they shared something with you that really just showed how their self-esteem was, they really were so harsh on themselves, right? So if you think of someone like that, can you recall how did you respond to your friend in that type of situation? Like, what words did you say to him or her? What was your body like? What was your tone of your voice like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can think, my son is 18, so I've been a mom for a long time, and I've certainly met a lot of parents that have been facing all sorts of struggles in all different phases of parenthood, which is they're very different phases. When you have a baby, there's one phase, toddler. As they grow older, things change and problems present themselves and challenges come up. But to your question, I can think of lots of examples, but I definitely felt incredible empathy when a parent friend of mine was telling me some situation with their child that they felt like they did the wrong thing, which is a very common thing us parents do, or they felt some kind of guilt, or they were ashamed of what they were going to tell me. And I can remember being just incredibly empathetic, and because I'm also a mom, so I could share all of that struggle, even if it wasn't specifically happening with my son. I instantly felt it. It was like I was almost experiencing the same thing in those moments that I'm thinking about with those particular friends. So yeah, my body would be very relaxed. I was very tender with them, and very, very supportive. And the language would have been around just making them understand that they're doing the best they can, that parenting is just filled with challenges, and that, you know, they're doing a great job handling whatever the situation was in front of them. But yeah, very, very gentle, compassionate, empathetic, um, you know, in the way that I approach those friends in those moments. So
Yeah, thank you for
sure.
saying that. And yeah, it's interesting how you could really relate to that person, their parenting struggle, and you know, empathy kicks in, right?
Yeah.
And you're kind and tender, gentle in your words, and your body is relaxed toward them. Almost, probably
Yeah.
that sounds like you want to give a hug.
Oh yeah, I was always affectionate. I should have mentioned that. That it always included lots of, you know, either shoulder touching or hugging straight on if they wanted it. You know, not everybody wants affection in those moments, but if they were open to it, I almost can't stop myself. So
Yeah.
it would include that too.
Yeah. So now I'm going to ask you this next question is,
Sure.
think of a moment in your life when you felt like a failure as a parent, or
Yeah.
you did something that you just completely felt inadequate.
Right.
And how how did you treat yourself in that moment? What
You
did
know,
you say to yourself? How was your body like in that moment, right?
not good. You know, I'm definitely better at it now than I used to be, and definitely when my son was younger. And the couple of moments I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, um, definitely super brutal on myself. You know,
Mhm.
as if I am supposed to be perfect at this because I am a mom. Somehow that turned me into this perfect person that always made the right decision and handled everything perfectly. But yeah, I was very hard on myself, especially in the probably younger years of my son's life when, you know, they're so vulnerable as young children. And so I was definitely more, you know, stringent on myself because their lives depend on you when they're little. So yeah, a lot
Mhm.
I've learned over the years, but back then I was definitely super hard on myself. A
Mhm.
lot different than I would have acted towards a friend in the moment. So
Yeah. So I think, you know, this simple exercise, this simple inquiry of like, how do you relate to a friend, and then how do you relate to yourself, really shows that so often we are our worst self-critic, right?
yeah,
And we are our worst self-judge. And if you're watching this webinar and you can relate to that, well, please know that you are not alone. And in fact, the research shows that 78% of people are more compassionate toward others than they are toward themselves. And only about 6% of people are more compassionate toward themselves than they are toward others. And whatever the difference is, that group is about equally compassionate toward others and themselves. And I think also important point is to make here is that compassion is a skill, and cultivating that skill takes time, courage, right? Uh, it takes it takes an attitude of non-fixing and beginning to accept yourself and your experiences and learning from them. And this is something that I'm learning, perhaps not as a parent, but just as a human being. And it's truly an adventure or a journey of self-exploration. And how can I begin to be rather than a harsh judge? How can I begin to be like a curious scientist and approach my experiences with curiosity and tenderness and open-heartedness, right?
Yeah.
I love this quote by Brené Brown. She says, "The question isn't so much, are you parenting the right way, as it is, are you the adult you want your child to grow up to be?"
Nice. I like that.
And I want to ask you, Anne, do you want your son to be self-compassionate?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And if I imagine I would ask any loving, caring parent, would you want your child to be self-compassionate? The answer would probably be yes.
Yes.
Right. And what I'm learning also, that while parents want their children to be self-compassionate, but so often we as parents or human beings, we don't model that.
Right.
And I will go as far as saying that my mom, she's such a compassionate and loving person. However, what I noticed, she's so harsh on herself. And I really think that my self-critical voice comes from not her criticizing me, which it can be for a person that the voice of their caregiver is their critical voice. But it's not actually the case for me. It's me watching my mom being hard on herself,
Right.
rubbed off on me, right?
Right.
So how can we begin to practice self-compassion, because we want our kids to be self-compassionate too?
Yeah.
Right. So before I give a little bit more information on the definition of self-compassion, I would like us to just talk about compassion. What is compassion? And I do love this definition, that compassion is the courage to see the cause of suffering and the willingness to alleviate that suffering. Actually, I would even add the willingness to alleviate the suffering and the action to alleviate that suffering. Right?
Yes.
So compassion is an act. And from Latin translation, the word compassion really means to suffer with. Yeah, so to me it's so interesting because it's a social emotion. It includes others automatically. It's not just you experiencing something, you're experiencing something with someone, right? So then what is self-compassion? And what is then self-compassion based on this?
So, having the courage to witness your own suffering and the willingness to alleviate it. I mean, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, and that's the tricky part to self-compassion, I think, is being able to separate yourself and be the witness to your own suffering and see it,
Yeah, right, exactly. And what's interesting about self-compassion, that unlike self-acceptance or unlike self-pity, self-compassion, like compassion, also assumes others and our relationship with others. And with self-compassion, we are including ourselves in the circle of compassion.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just a reminder that being self-compassionate actually is not selfish at all. In fact, research shows that self-compassionate people are actually also very compassionate and even more compassionate toward others than those that have that perhaps don't practice self-compassion. And self-compassionate people recognize the suffering of others, and they're very empathetic, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a pity party at all. It's actually a realization that as all human beings, we all suffer, and I suffer, and I struggle. And if in terms of parenting, I struggle as our other parents do too.
Right.
So how can I be kind to myself while I'm struggling?
Exactly.
So from that definition of compassion and self-compassion, Dr. Kristin Neff, who is the developer of the Mindful Self-Compassion program, she created this model of components of self-compassion. And what she advocates for is self-compassion can be really defined through these three elements. So one element is of self-kindness, another element is of common humanity, and the third element is of mindfulness, right? So self-kindness really means, being kind to yourself and talking to yourself in a kind voice, perhaps saying to yourself, I'm here for you, rather than judging yourself and telling yourself you're worthless, right?
Right.
And then the component of common humanity really means recognizing I am just a human. I'm trying my best. And again, when it comes to parenting, I am doing my best. I'm just a parent. I'm a young mom who has this baby, and I'm trying to protect this baby, keep it alive, and I'm doing my best. But I also have my own limitations, and this is hard.
Yeah. Yes.
And and what was interesting to me as I was learning about mindful self-compassion, that the opposite of common humanity is actually isolation. So yeah, just think about it. When we don't recognize that we struggle just like others do too,
Yeah.
the desire is to hide and to cover with shame and to flee and not talk about our problems.
Yeah. That makes sense.
You
Yeah.
know, can you recall perhaps a moment when you felt that it's just me having
Oh,
this?
yeah. Lots of I still do that. And then I have to stop myself and be like, no, everybody goes through this, or everybody has experienced this situation. It's such an easy thing to fall into, the idea that, we're the only one in that particular moment of pain or experiencing that particular challenge,
Yeah. And I love what you said about I need to stop myself. That's mindfulness, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I need to pause and I need to observe what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling or how my body is in this present moment to realize, wow, this is painful, or I'm stressed, or I'm suffering, and tell myself maybe, darling, I see you suffering.
Yeah.
And giving and what I've learned, through practice of self-compassion and mindfulness, is that giving, in order to even give yourself self-compassion, first of all, you have to be aware of your suffering. You have to notice first and foremost that I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Because so often we can get consumed by that internal conversation and start having that internal dialogue and just go down the rabbit hole where everything just is getting worse with every moment. And we can really quickly go from I made a mistake to I am a mistake.
That's well said. Yes, we do that very quickly.
Right? So with mindfulness helps us unstick and recognize that, I'm feeling right now is, let's say, stress, right? Or feeling anger, or I feel anxiety. And it doesn't mean that I am this angry or anxious person, but I am experiencing a feeling, rather.
Right.
And so do all the other people that, you probably know, and I now have probably at some point experienced some version of that feeling.
Right. Of course. Right.
But I do want to ask you, just because I know that you practice mindfulness, and even today before our session, you mentioned you were meditating. Yeah, what does mindfulness mean for you? How do you use it, and how do you practice? And maybe if you want to talk about your experience, how did you arrive to that conclusion that, wow, I actually really need mindfulness and meditation in my life?
Yeah. So I started a long time ago, I think, with meditation, and I would use it and then go away and come back, and that ebb and flow is always around challenges, right? Like when I'm happy and everything's good, I don't think about mindfulness much. I don't think about meditation much. And then when I hit some problem, then I'm like, oh boy, I have to use something in my toolbox, and meditation is in my toolbox, and mindfulness kind of overlaps that. I've used it all the time. In fact, these days, I'm using it a lot when I'm feeling stressed, to be aware, to sort of separate myself and look back, just like you were describing, and trying to relax my body in the moment. And that requires mindfulness. Like I have to think, what am I doing in this moment? How is my breathing? How is my, what is my mental state? What am I telling myself? All of those questions are part of me being mindful about what I'm experiencing in the moment, or things that I ask myself. Another thing I've been doing recently is, besides guided meditation, which is usually what I use, is when I'm trying to sleep, because with COVID and everything going on, I've had a couple of nights where I've been restless. So essentially, I'll use questions like, where am I right now? If I'm lying in bed and trying to sleep, and I get wrapped up in some work stuff or whatever it is, as soon as I'm aware of it and mindful of it, then I ask myself, where am I? And then I answer, I'm in my comfy bed. And then the next question is, what do I feel? Like, what are the sensations around me? And then it's, the cool sheets or whatever it is. So I start describing my environment and being very focused in the now. And that always helps me get back to sleep, right? Because it forces my brain to come away from the spiral that it's doing mentally around whatever I'm thinking about, and back to the moment. So, and that is mindfulness, taking that jump from whatever my brain has been doing back to the moment that I'm actually in, the place that I'm actually in, and then sort of, coming inside my body and being like, okay, what's going on? Like my shoulders are up to my ears, or my, neck is tense, or my head is hurting, or whatever it is, and starting to tell my body piece by piece to relax. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, so does your son know that you practice mindfulness and meditation?
Yes. So I meditate, and these days, because he's home from college because of COVID, we are sharing this apartment in Atlanta. So when I'm meditating, he's very aware, because I'm usually in some place where he can see me. So yeah, he has also practiced meditation along the way, and he watches, or not watches, but he's seen me meditate. So he knows that trick and how important I think it is. And I never taught him meditation, any like meditative practice, but we did do a lot of breath work when he was growing up. So in moments of stress, we would deep breathe in the nose, out the mouth. I taught him that really young. And I think he still uses that. So he's 18, he's figuring it out for himself, but I know he has used it in the past. So.
Wow, this is incredible. And I didn't know that about you teaching him the breathing.
Yeah.
And right, it's so interesting how, like, while you are teaching your child to breathe, but in the same time, you are actually practicing it with your child. So you are practicing, and you need it too.
Exactly. And that's probably where it came from the first time I did it. Was like, oh my goodness, I have to stop and breathe. So let's do it together. And then maybe we can both, start to de-stress at the same time. So
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And, I love this quote by John Kabat-Zinn. He is the developer of a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And he has many wonderful quotes about mindfulness, but how he describes it as mindfulness is a way of befriending ourselves and our experience. Right?
Love that.
And what I love about it is that truly mindfulness in full blossom is being aware of your experience, right? Awareness, but also it's the quality of your awareness. Is it a tender quality? I'm aware of my experience, and rather than judging myself for whatever I'm feeling, stressed, angry, sad, rather than judging myself, can I be with it in tender presence and be my own good friend rather than a judge or an enemy?
Yeah.
And another, just I think valuable among many other valuable things about mindfulness is that it really helps us get in touch with ourselves, and that moment of just a quick pause. And let me ask myself, just like you described, what am I feeling right now? Because truly, we need to know what we are feeling so we can proceed and deal with it in a way that, right? And I love this saying that we use in mindful self-compassion training. It says, name it to tame it.
I love that. Yeah.
Like, almost like when you go to a doctor, you have a broken arm, you get a diagnosis, broken bone, and you get treatment for it, right? So there's the same thing with your moment-to-moment experiences and emotions. What part of me is broken right now? Can I name that so I can tame it? So we can't heal what we can't feel. So allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel, that's the way of being mindful, and that's the way towards self-compassion.
Yeah.
All right. So, while we talked about these three components of self-compassion, self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, also another great thing about self-compassion that it actually involves both strength and tenderness. So while perhaps there is this assumption, when I talk to someone about self-compassion, and they may think, oh, this is just some soft resource, some, fluffy thing, some hippie thing. But actually, yes, while self-compassion has those tender or more feminine qualities, if you would, it also has those more masculine qualities. So if you are watching our webinar and you can see the picture on the screen, these are my friends, April and Mason. So they're definitely like yin and yang in their marriage, and self-compassion also includes yin and yang. But we don't have to assume that she is always the yin and he's always the yang. Because as we look at this picture, April, my friend, looks more like she's that, yang part. So, but yeah, I just wanted to mention how, self-compassion, that soft side, or you can think of it soft front, right? Strong back. So the soft front, it's about comforting your physical body, right? In moments when you struggle or when you're stressed. Yes, it's about soothing your emotional body with messages of kindness, right? And it is about validating your situation right now, right? So, so that's that more tender aspect, being with yourself. But that strong back yang side of self-compassion, it is about protecting yourself, right? Protecting yourself from toxic emotions or harm or people sometimes, really.
Yeah.
Right. It's providing for yourself what you need. Perhaps you need a healthy meal or a nap or, something that can sustain you. That's self-compassion. Also, self-compassion is about motivating yourself, right?
Yeah.
Motivating to go for a walk or stay healthy or
Yeah.
exercise. That's self-compassion too. Right?
Yeah.
So the central question of self-compassion is, what do I need right now? Right? What do I need right now? And I think remembering that sometimes we need soft, but sometimes we need strong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, when we talk about this yin and yang side, I mean, wouldn't you say like parenting is like a perfect arena to practice both?
Oh yeah. There's so many opposites in parenting emotionally, and yeah, you have this constant yin and yang going because you have the incredibly tender moments with your child where you're offering so much love, so much compassion, and then you also have the protective, got to get things done for this child, putting food on the plate and their household needs and schooling and everything that they need, and you have to be kind of strong and motivating in that way. So there are always these parallel situations in parenting, as in life generally, but definitely in parenting. You almost go in and out of those two with just at a rapid pace during parenting. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and like how can we remember that and turn that sort of compassion toward ourselves too, right?
Yeah.
And remember that, when I motivate myself, when I eat healthy, or when I, try to protect myself from harmful things, that is compassion too, because that's what I would do for my child.
Exactly. Right. Yes. Well said. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where I can speak from my own experience, but parenting, I'll use that takes the village phrase again. It does take a village. And if you don't use that support system, or if you don't ask for help during parenting, you end up doing this yin yang thing all the time, but you're not in there, right? It's just yin yang, and all of this is centered around your child. And while that's happening, and you're working so hard and moving in and out of those different sectors, your own sense of self is starting to struggle, right? And starting to need attention. And if that goes on for too long, then you get into real trouble, right? Either your health is in trouble or mental health is in trouble. So yeah, it's a big challenge in parenting to remember that this dynamic is going to be at play, and you need to act on it, and instinctively you're going to act on it, but you need to apply, just like you said, the same thing back to yourself, and make sure that you're protecting your own self-care, you're motivating yourself around what you need as a mom or as a dad, so that you can give that back to your child. It's a balance, and it's not an easy one to strike, but it's so important. So.
Yeah. Chris Garmer, he is one of the developers, Dr. Chris Garmer, one of the developers of this brand. I was very fortunate to have him as my teacher. And something he said really grabbed my attention is that self-compassion is a path toward reparenting yourself.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Because a lot of times, a lot of us actually maybe haven't had good parents, or our parents are just human beings and they've made mistakes, and somehow that impacted us and our levels of self-compassion.
Right.
So when he said that, immediately what I started to imagine is myself as a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And now me as an adult giving this little girl a hug. Girl, I got you.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
And this is just so powerful. And this is a practice that I actually still use. I have a picture of myself as a little girl in which I look very lost and sad, and I don't know, anybody who would look at that picture would immediately feel compassion over that child.
Yeah.
But it's just as a reminder for myself that how can I relate to myself as I would to a child, you know?
Yeah. There's a great meditation that I do from Jack Cornfield. It's a loving kindness meditation, which there are a lot of those out there, but he uses that exact, he guides you through that exact scenario of imagining yourself as a child and then giving that child love. And it's a really powerful part of the meditation. And I have a couple pictures of myself in mind when I think, when I do that meditation too. So yeah, that's a very, very powerful way to heal yourself and any wounds you have from, childhood.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning. Yeah, loving kindness meditation is a wonderful tool that I think a lot of us can use like on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
So as we move forward with our webinar, I just wanted to introduce this practice to you and actually to everyone else watching this webinar. So this practice is called Park. And actually, this is something that I developed after I became a teacher in mindful self-compassion. I wanted to come up with an acronym that would help me remember to practice self-compassion. So I came up with this acronym PARK, P-A-R-K. And each letter stands for an action, if you would. So P stands for pause, right? Just pausing, taking that moment, taking a few breaths,
Yeah.
Really, mindfulness and self-compassion, it's just an art of pausing constantly.
Yeah, you're right.
So A in Park stands for asking myself, need now.
Yeah.
And then read is about reading. R stands for read, and it's about reading your body, right? Our body holds so much information, whether it's tension or a pulsation or stress. We can sometimes feel anxiety in our chest or fear in our throat, or sometimes our shoulders can feel tense or we have headaches. So reading our physical body, then reading our emotional body, perhaps even labeling, what is that I'm feeling right now? Is it fear? Is it sadness? Is it disappointment? Is it loneliness, right? Reading your emotions, and then also reading your thoughts, which can be tricky. Our thoughts, our minds actually tend to race quite fast. But sometimes it may be helpful to imagine yourself as if you're in the movie and your thoughts are like a movie. So rather than being entangled with your thoughts, can I become an observer, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful. Some mindfulness practitioners kind of invite you to watch your thoughts as if they're clouds just flying by in the sky.
Yeah.
So yeah, reading your body, reading your emotions, reading your thoughts. And finally, letter K in this Park model stands for kindly respond. Kindly is really a key word here. Kindly respond to whatever you identified, whatever you just explored there. And perhaps that act of kindly responding to yourself kind of goes back to those yin and yang actions. Does it mean do I need to comfort myself or validate myself or protect myself or provide something for myself? So what would be the kind thing right now for me to do toward myself? So yeah, I just wanted to bring this model to your attention and to everyone else's. In the moment when you feel like you need to park. Right?
Yeah.
So take a break, take this parenting break. parking, right? You can also think of park as like going for a walk in the park.
Yeah, that's a nice one. Yeah.
You know, this is more a yang side, right? Being more active. And you can think of it as the yin side, sitting on the bench in the park, if that's what you need to do.
I love it. Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to invite parents to do that. And a lot of parents that I know really sometimes, I mean, they don't have time to meditate for 5 or 10 minutes, or at least they don't think they do. But
Right.
can you just take 30 seconds and pause, ask yourself, what do I need right now? Because asking that question is already an act of self-compassion. How often do you ask yourself that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then read, you know, your body, where you're feeling, what you're feeling, your emotions, your thoughts, and perhaps just take a moment to say to yourself, darling, I see you're suffering and I care about you.
Yeah.
Just that. Right?
Yeah.
15 to 30 seconds, but that's already is a good practice, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, do you have any comments on time constraints when it comes to parenting and practicing?
Yes. I think when you have really little kids, it gets easier to park as they get a little older. Well, actually, there's a time when they're babies, when they're sleeping, and there's kind of a window there in the beginning where you can probably take a little time, but very soon that changes. And then you're faced with, okay, I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to do this for myself. And that comes back to that sort of yin yang discussion. Like, I have to stop here. So even if that means you have to literally pull over the car with your child and the crying in the back, whatever it is, you have to sort of make that choice. And it gets, like I said, it's definitely hard to park when you have really little kids, but it gets easier. And I think that's the parking, doing this park exercise with little kids, that's when your support group really comes in, right? If you have a neighbor, a friend, a family member that's helping you when you have a young child, you can park a lot easier, right? Like, please help me. I need to do this for myself. Can you watch my son, daughter for 30 minutes so I can do this, right? So that's where support systems really, really come in handy. So,
wow, and you mentioned something so important, like asking for help. That's self-compassion.
Yes, that is self-compassionate. And it's so funny as parents, especially moms, gosh, we have the super mom thing so ingrained in us that we're supposed to know instinctively how to do this and handle it all by ourselves. And that's just not the way we should approach motherhood. We need help. We need to ask for help, just like you said.
Yeah.
So.
And there's something beautiful in it. The moment you ask for help, I mean, it's a vulnerable moment, but it's also a practice of humility and recognition that I'm just a human.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So as we are moving, from parking to why do we need to park after all? I was thinking how when I was a kid, and I don't know how my parents managed to not either really hurt me or kill me, because sometimes I would really push their buttons. And parental rage is real, apparently, right? I mean, it may be embarrassing for parents to say it, but a lot of times in that moment of rage, you're like, I just want to like choke my child right now because they're really like stretching my limits.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're going to do it, but it's a thing. It's in psychology they call it parental rage. Like, it's a real emotion.
Right.
So, but I'm just curious, what are some things that you can remember, things that pushed your buttons to where you really felt angry?
And this is another, I'll say this too about anger. It's another thing that's sort of like a taboo parenting topic. Like, we're not supposed to get angry. We're raising children. How can we get angry at these cute little babies? There's that kind of mentality that we have to sort of break down, because anger in parenthood is a very real, normal thing to experience. And every single parent on the planet is going to feel anger. It's just completely valid. So yeah, I can think of a few times right off the top of my head where I was definitely angry, and it took a lot of sort of, processing to slow myself down and deep breathe and bounce back from it. But it's a very valid and common and expected emotion in parenthood, because parenthood is taxing. I mean, it takes every single ounce of patience and all of your energy, and sometimes you're going nights, months without sleep. And yeah, it can be the hardest thing you'll do. So there are definitely moments where it gets hard, and it's completely normal to be angry. It's just figuring out how to channel that's really the trick, so.
Yeah. So let's talk about figuring out a way to channel or work with anger. So the Mindful Self-Compassion program offers some strategies that help you work with difficult emotions, such as anger, right? So in moments when perhaps as a parent you experience anger, can you first of all validate it, right? Support the truth of your anger.
Right.
I love this quote by Pema Cordon. She has this wonderful book, which is called When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times. And she says the most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. Right?
That's nice. Yeah.
So the ultimate harm is when we actually say to ourselves, no, I'm not feeling angry, or I shouldn't feel this way, right?
Right.
Or when we resist, or when we deny. But the truth is what we resist persists.
Exactly. Yes.
So supporting the truth of your anger really is the first step, and validating and saying to yourself, I feel angry. There are reasons for that.
Right. Yeah.
And what's interesting about anger, right? So then the next strategy is to look deeper. Anger is a strong negative emotion, but usually underneath anger, it's like onion, like unpeeling it and being curious, like what is that I'm really feeling?
Right.
And usually underneath anger, there are some softer negative emotions that are a little bit more workable, like fear, right? Think of a situation when a parent gets angry at the child, when the child runs into the road, and usually you have a fear the car is going to hit them.
Right. Exactly. That's a great example. Yeah.
Or sadness, right? Let's say your child says something to you because they're just being a child, like I hate you, because children say those things, and that hurts you, and that makes you sad, and then ultimately makes you angry.
Yeah.
But it's that underlying emotion of sadness and hurt under anger, or disappointment, right? When your child perhaps, I don't know, gets involved in some activity with their friends that they shouldn't have been involved, and you are angry, but ultimately you're disappointed and again sad and worried and afraid that they may get, hurt.
Yeah, right.
So just looking deeper under your anger and asking yourself, but what is that really that I'm feeling? And then looking even deeper, because what's interesting that usually underneath those emotions, those difficult emotions, there are usually some unmet needs, right? And as a parent, when a child says to you, like, I hate you, right? And you're angry about it, but because you also as a parent and as a human as a human being have a need to be loved.
Certainly, right.
Or the need for you, just like your child has a need to be seen and heard. And how kids, they're like, mom, look at me, don't look at your phone, right?
Right.
But it's the same for you. You need to be heard. and you need to be seen. And when I tell you to do something, like as a parent, when I tell you to my child to do something, why don't you listen to me? You make me angry because it makes me feel I'm not seen or heard.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah.
My needs are not being met. Or so just thinking about like what are some of my deep human needs are not being met when my child makes me angry. I need to be loved, to be heard, to be validated, to be connected, to be respected, to be known, right?
Yeah.
And then it, like, the picture becomes clearly, and the anger perhaps shifts and turns into this wisdom process, right? And then and that actually, what that gives you is the space to be more self-compassionate, because then you realize, this hurts, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And rather than judging yourself for, I'm this angry parent, you shift to, my needs aren't met. I'm just a human being. How can I be compassionate to myself right now? This is difficult.
Yes. Yes.
So just seeing how can we work with anger in those ways, validating, looking deeply, the soft feelings underneath, looking even deeper at the unmet needs, and finally, perhaps giving ourselves compassion for how difficult it is.
Yeah.
So when we talk about giving ourselves compassion, I think it's important to recognize that those states of anger, right, or those parenthood, and when anger and disappointment and whatever the kids do to us, however they push our buttons, ultimately it comes down to the way our brain works, right? The child does something, it triggers us, it activates our threat response system, it puts us into that fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a parent, let's say your child said something to you, triggered you, you're in a fight mode, I'm going to fight this. We may have an argument, and the flight mode, it may be like, you know what, I don't even want to talk to you right now, go to your room.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Let me leave, and you leave too. And the freeze mode is that we get stuck in our thoughts, and we become kind of consumed by them, and we think again and again and again, and ruminate about what we should have or could have done, and so forth, right? So compassion, giving ourselves compassion, actually can help downregulate those reactions.
Yeah.
And it can really help calm our emotional, if you would. So there are different ways how we can actually cultivate compassion and activate our rational brain, so it can start working on cultivating compassion. So I just wanted to introduce a few strategies here. So one thing that you can do as a parent or a human being who is being triggered by something unpleasant or difficult is actually you can give yourself a supportive touch. So research shows that placing your hand over your heart, perhaps, or both hands, or placing your hand on the part of your body that is experiencing anxiety, like for me, it's my belly quite often, actually lets you know that you are receiving that soothing, warm touch, and actually can help downregulate that emotional brain, that fight, flight, freeze mode.
Gotcha.
So what I've noticed now myself do, that sometimes I do it consciously, but sometimes I just do it when somebody shares something with me difficult. I just put my hand on my heart, and I'm just like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do that because it's difficult, and we want to hold our heart with tenderness, and we give ourselves the soothing touch. So I do the same for myself now. When times are hard for me, I put a hand in my heart and tell myself, I'm so sorry. Really supporting myself. And for different people, they may, try different touches. Like sometimes you may hold your face, like cradle your face, or you may just give yourself a little gentle touch on the back of your neck. Do you have something you can think of, like maybe like rubbing your hands in a gentle way? Like, can you think of something that you do sometimes that bringing yourself soothing touch through a certain gesture?
Yeah, I definitely do the heart thing. And I think I do it almost instinctively, just like you were saying. Like if someone's sharing something hard, I do it just to kind of, give myself a soothing response in that moment. So I do the heart thing. I also do the hug thing. Like it seems funny, but I actually read this and I like it. So I'll actually do a hug on my shoulders as if someone else is hugging me. And I squeeze just like someone is hugging me, and that helps too. I mean, it's kind of awkward to do it because you feel sort of strange, but right, because you just feel that same kind of closeness that you would feel if you were being hugged by someone. So yeah,
exactly. And your brain thinks it doesn't matter who is giving you the hug. Like it thinks, okay, I'm getting hugged right now.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So one way to activate that compassion response in your brain is through that supportive or soothing touch. Another thing that we can do is really just send ourselves a message, or tell ourselves the words that we would tell to a good friend, words of encouragement, words of love or support. So sometimes it may be kind of hard to come up with words if we're thinking, what is that I can tell myself to feel, to help myself, give myself some compassion. So the good strategy here is think of a good friend who maybe would be struggling in a similar situation. What would you say to your friend? Maybe like, you're still a good person. You're still a good mom.
Yeah.
Still a good dad. You're still worthy of love. What would you say to that friend? And can you turn that message toward yourself? Like,
Yeah.
you're still a good mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another way to begin to cultivate compassion. And also, a mental aspect of giving yourself compassion is really beginning to accept yourself and your experience just as you are. And this is a little bit challenging, right? Because usually we tend to jump into resistance or non-acceptance. But I mean, it's a cliche, but sometimes, saying to yourself, well, it is what it is. Right?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
like, this is life. And how can I accept that life is imperfect? I am imperfect and I'm trying my best, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of these like physical, emotional, and mental strategies, perhaps, that as a parent you can do, or as a human being you can do, that just little reminders, moments of compassion in your daily life.
Yeah.
So I actually now would like to do a practice with you, Anne.
Okay.
And I don't know, have we ever meditated together? I think we did one time.
We did one time in the park. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. So today I will be guiding us through this practice, and this is called self-compassion break. And this practice is developed by Dr. Christine Neff and Dr. Chris Garmer. And it kind of embraces and includes all of these different components of self-compassion that we talked about, like self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness. And it also includes that component of relating to yourself as you would to a good friend, and just the component of pausing. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to do it in a more formal way, the way, like a meditation, and it will maybe take 3 to 5 minutes. But really, anyone can do this anytime. It may take you a minute, and you may practice the whole thing and remember all of the components, or maybe you can just recall one component and just practice what works for you. So, all right. So here we come, self-compassion break. Because we need a break. So if you would like to practice this self-compassion break, I I just invite you to either sit or stand or lay down comfortably. And just take a few breaths to just to arrive into the present moment. And if you wish, you can close your eyes fully or partially. And now I invite you to bring to mind a situation that is stressful for you right now. Whether it's a parenting related situation or job related or pandemic related situation, something that is difficult for you and stressful. And I invite you to choose something that's not too overwhelming. So maybe on the scale from 1 to 10, maybe it's between 4 and 6, just so we can work safely with this practice. But do bring to mind something that actually evokes some tension in your body. And perhaps visualize vividly who is involved or what's been said or done. And I'm beginning to bring mindfulness into this practice and beginning to notice how thinking about this situation feels in your body. Perhaps there are some unpleasant sensations that arise. Maybe in your mind's eye, labeling it, identifying it, and saying to yourself, this is stressful. Or this is difficult. It hurts. And now I invite you to bring into this practice the component of common humanity. And perhaps remind yourself that a lot of people are going through something difficult and perhaps have experienced it, something like you have. So maybe saying to yourself, I am not alone. Other people struggle this way too. Life is imperfect. I am just a human. And now I invite you to bring this component of self-kindness into the practice and perhaps placing your hand on your heart or any other soothing part on your body and feeling the warmth of your hand. And perhaps saying to yourself, may I be kind to myself. Or may I begin to be kind to myself. May I begin to forgive myself. May I begin to accept myself just as I am. And perhaps you need another message or the words don't come naturally. So think of a dear friend who might be struggling with the same problem, the same situation. And think, what would you say to a dear friend in this situation? And how would you say it? And now see if you can turn the message toward yourself. Notice how it feels to receive this message. Now gently letting go of any imagery and letting go of the practice, and just for a moment noticing whatever you're feeling, allowing yourself to feel whatever you're feeling, and accepting yourself just as you are in this moment. And whenever you're ready, if you had your eyes closed, you can open your eyes. Yeah. And do you want to share if you noticed anything during this practice, or what was the experience for you during this practice?
Yeah, that was a really good one. I'm surprised at how effective it was, as quick as it went by. So yeah, I immediately started feeling tension in my chest and shoulders, thinking about what's troubling me. And then it's funny, the first part when you were saying, putting your hand there and trying to, create that warmth touch, it wasn't as effective for me as when I imagined what I would say to a friend and turned it back around. And suddenly the language changed and it was really nice. You know what I mean? But that was the most effective thing for me, was turning what I would have said to someone that was experiencing what I'm experiencing, that I care about, and then using that same language towards me. Yeah, that was.
Did you feel like your body softened?
Oh yeah, I feel warmth immediately, and softer, and my jaw relax some. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've taught this practice to a lot of people, and a lot of people say, I can't really send myself a message of kindness until the moment I send it to someone I care about, and then turn that toward myself. That's what works for people, right?
Yeah.
Like, we are so hard on ourselves, we can't even give ourselves a message of kindness. Sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. So how can we work with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to you all who are watching this webinar, just an encouragement. Perhaps you felt good practicing the practice. Perhaps you felt bad. Perhaps you didn't feel anything. So just know that sometimes, we do feel bad when we begin to give ourselves compassion. Because for so long we go without giving ourselves love, and love reveals everything unlike itself. So when we begin to give love to those parts of ourselves that have been unloved for so long, it can really make us very emotional and really melt our hearts, right? So I just want you to be encouraged, and self-compassion and self-kindness are dose-dependent practices. The more you do it, it's like a muscle. You're training that muscle, right? The more, that's why it's called practice, right? The more you do it, the more effective it is. But also, giving self-compassion really is not about making ourselves feel better. It's actually about caring for ourselves because we're feeling bad. And just to say something on this note, like, let's say when the child has the flu and the parent takes care of the child and gives the child kindness and compassion, really not to make the flu go away. You really can't, right? The flu kind of has to go through its own process. So the parent takes care of the child because the child is ill, because the child is struggling, suffering, because it deserves kindness and compassion in this difficult moment. So it's the same thing with giving compassion to ourselves. When we begin to give ourselves compassion, well, because I want my struggles to go away, actually that's a hidden form of resistance. Like, I shouldn't feel this way. Right? And remember, what we resist persists. Right? So self-compassion is about, I'm feeling terrible, I'm suffering. How can I be kind to myself? Because like all living beings, I want to be free from suffering and I want to be happy. So it's not easy to do. And it's so easy to start using self-compassion as a technique to fix yourself. But it's really not about that. It's about holding yourself and your experience with tenderness while you're experiencing it.
Yeah.
All right. So really, we're getting into the end of our talk today. And just as a conclusion, right, practicing self-compassion is ultimately, it's not about not being a mess at all. It's actually about becoming a compassionate mess. Okay. So our lives are messy. Parenthood is messy, family life is messy. So how can we embrace that wholeheartedly and compassionately and say, you know what? Maybe my life is a mess, but how can I be compassionate toward myself while it is so? And I love this quote by Carl Rogers, who says, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change."
Nice.
The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change. And I think it's true. The moment you begin to say to yourself, well, this is who I am, but it's also that moment when you begin to see the opportunities for the things you could do with an open heart and open mind, rather than judging yourself, beating yourself up, which actually, I don't know if you know this, but self-criticism creates a very narrow vision, and it prevents growth. It prevents us from making meaningful steps toward change. So self-compassion promotes growth, and the moment you accept yourself, that's the moment where you can change. Which,
love it. Yeah.
How do we wrap our mind around that? So I love also just this idea that as parents or as human beings, we're always looking at what we want to improve, where we want to be, and what steps we must take to get there. Our energy is being spent and our thoughts are being focused on what we are not and where we are not and how far we have to go to get there. Right?
Yeah.
And this focusing upon the negative and carrying around this excess weight of non-acceptance really often acts as a block to progress, and it often causes resistance and suffering, and really prevents change from happening. So how can we begin to shift our vision and our perspective and just allow ourselves sometimes just be compassionate?
Yeah.
We're all works in progress.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to mention this wonderful book, which served as a resource and a source of inspiration for today's conversation. The book is called Self-Compassion for Parents. So I highly recommend it for anyone. It's written by Dr. Susan Pollak. And I just wanted to say something about the book. So parents sometimes don't have time to read. Okay. So the wonderful thing about this book, you can literally open it on any page, and it introduces you a short practice, a description of a struggle, like a tantrum or something, and like a short practice how to work with it. So you can really like open it on any page and pretty much relate to it as a parent or as a human, as a family person. And I think that's just such a good tool to have at home. Right. Just something to help you practice self-compassion. And this show must go on. I encourage everyone to continue considering the possibility of self-compassion. Continue practicing it. Even a small dose of self-compassion can make such a big impact on our lives. And continuously giving small dosage to ourselves of self-compassion can actually begin really change our lives for better, I think. What do you think, Anne?
I completely agree. I think the moment that I give myself more self-compassion, not only do I change, but everything changes around me. I've noticed that so many times in my life. When I really start to be my own advocate, the world starts advocating for me at the same time, Yeah.
And what a good example you are setting for your son, right? When you are advocating for yourself.
Yeah.
And you are teaching him by example to advocate for himself, because you want that for him too. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So again, who we are and how we engage with the world are much stronger predictors of how our children will do than what we know about parenting. And Brené Brown said that.
That's nice.
So I know I was watching my parents and the way they engaged with the world. And they maybe knew something about parenting, maybe they didn't. But all I knew is that I observed them.
Right.
Their strengths, their weaknesses, and really how they related to themselves and each other during the times of struggle, but also during the happy times. So I can speak from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Right. And do you have anything else, anything that you just would love to mention, or maybe, I don't know, something that we didn't cover?
Let me think. Yeah, I will touch on just what you said about the example and the quotes that you've given about that as a parent. That's I've seen that in my own life as a parent, that it's so much more about the example that we're setting than any other action that we take as a parent, because if we're telling our children to love themselves and be compassionate with themselves, and we're not being loving and compassionate to ourselves, there's a problem there. And kids are smart. They sense it. They understand, hey, wait a minute, there's two different versions of events going on, and more likely they're going to follow what you do than what you say to do, right? So I've definitely seen that in my life as a parent. And so, yeah, that's exactly why it's such a good practice. And just like you said, if I want my son to practice self-compassion, I have to be self-compassionate, right? So, yeah, I get it.
Well, and I just want to tell you, you are my hero in so many ways.
Thank you.
And really, to all the parents out there, you are my heroes. Again, I'm not a parent to a human child yet, and perhaps part of it is that it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary to dive into it, but also there are a lot of beautiful things about it. So I just want to thank you, Anne, for spending this amazing time. I mean, I really enjoyed this.
Me too. I did too. Like I said, it's just given me a lot to think about, and I love that practice. And I'm so grateful that you asked me to do this.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So thank you all for joining us for this webinar, and I hope you continue practicing self-compassion. And I will include in the notes for this webinar contact information and additional resources if you are interested in learning more about mindful self-compassion. So that's it for today. May you all be well, may you all be healthy, may you all be happy, and may you all be peaceful. Goodbye.
Bye.